Hi BookTube, it's been a while. I'm here actually with my June wrap-up, and I'm just gonna get right into it. I'm going off the top of my head, so let's do it. So first of all, I want to talk about like the nonfiction I read in June. As with a lot of people, I was really struck by all the protests that were going on around the world for the Black Lives Matter movement, and I wanted to know more, and I was finally in a position where I was able to purchase books that would help me do this. So I concentrated very heavily on educating myself this month. So first I started with, well, I want to explain kind of my approach at this. I wanted to start with kind of like introductory stuff, something that would get my feet in the water first, and then work up to more extensive stuff. And still not even that extensive. Like I want to go further into it, but like I started off with text that would be easier to understand and digest, and move my way up, if that makes sense. Not that any of this is easy for me as a white passing person to understand, and to none of it's easy to digest. I mainly say it that way in that the first book I read was done in a humorous approach, so it made it easier. It wasn't easy, but it was easier, if that makes sense, to understand with a bit of humor in it. And that book was How Not to Get Shot by DL Hughly. And that was also subtitled And Other Advice from White People. And it's what I see a lot in my community and a lot from people, and I was even guilty of myself at some points, is but what did they do to deserve being shot? They must have done something, right? And so people give advice such as, like, you know, you shouldn't have been reaching, you know, over there. It looked like you could have been reaching for a gun. You shouldn't have been resisting arrest. And then DL Hughly breaks that down, and he even goes so far as to say, like, there's, you know, people in bed getting shot. There was a 12-year-old getting shot, and his advice was like, don't be black and young, you know, don't reach for anything, you know. And sometimes it was funny, you know, as in it's like, you can't not do that thing, you can't choose your skin color, right? And it was just, it was a good, really good introduction to this thing, and the way he presented it with humor made it really interesting as well. But it was that kind of humor where it's just kind of like you laugh and you go, oh god, like this is serious stuff, right? Like this is, you know, you can laugh about it, but you get that instant thought after of like, this is horrible. The next one I read was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo, and that was more intense in that it was actually like, okay, she gave an anecdote, she gave like statistics and like real, like, not that her experience isn't real, but like more worldly examples and everything, and then she broke it down, like, this is how you talk about this thing. And she introduced like intersectionality and class, sexism, ableism, all that kind of stuff into it as well, and says you have to talk about all of these things in regards to everything. You can't just talk about sexism without talking about racism, because the experience of black women is different from the experience of white women, and all the other races, you know, everyone experiences it differently. Yeah, and then I read The Skin We're In by Desmond, and that is about racism in Canada, and it was soul destroying. Let me tell you that. Like, it's easy, I'm Canadian, and it's easy for people in Canada to point at the States and be like, that's a you problem. This is not a Canadian problem, that's a you problem. And what Desmond is, he does a year, a whole year, so starting January 2016 to January 2017, and he talks about all the racist incidents that happened within that year. And I remember hearing about a few of them. Most recently, Defonte Miller's attackers were charged and not charged. That's a whole complicated issue. But he was mentioned in there, and I remember hearing about that attack, and other people being attacked. And I remember hearing about these stories and thinking that they were just simple, you know, one-offs, occasionally. And, you know, then he talked about immigration issues in Canada, and I had to set the book down and just be like, we suck. We really, really suck as Canadians, because we don't want to talk about it. We don't think it's an us problem. We think it's a United States problem. We don't think that it's a Canadian problem, and it very, very much is. And Desmond Cole does not shy away from showing this to you. So I highly recommend, even non-Canadians read it. But definitely, if you're Canadian, definitely pick that book up. It's at the top of the bestsellers list for nonfiction recently, I believe, too. And then I read Peace and Good Order by Harold R. Johnson, and this is about the Indigenous side of the similar issues that Black lives in the United States are facing. In Canada, I think very much the Black lives and the Indigenous lives movements are aiming for very similar objects in regards to criminal justice system and police interactions. And so Peace and Good Order talks about that from the Indigenous side. And it is mind blowing. It is amazing. I really highly recommend that. And because we like to think that Canadian Indigenous and First Nations are different from American Indigenous and First Nations, but to be honest, like, there were no borders there until, you know, like, the settlers came, right? So, like, there should be no borders. There should be no differentiation between Canadian and American First Nations, aside from, like, the differences between tribes, of course. You know, like, the Navajo Nation is very different from the Cree Nation, you know. There's those differences, but there's Cree people in the States and Cree people in Canada who share a culture, and it should not be separated. That's a whole other issue I'm not going to talk about. So no matter where you're from, you should definitely read Peace and Good Order. And I'm still currently reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, which, again, takes it to the next step. Like, he gets really into, like, it's almost like reading a piece of academia with how in-depth he's getting into things and how he talks about things, and I really enjoy it. Don't let that pit you off from reading it. It's still very accessible, but I'm just saying, in regards to, like, how in-depth he goes, it's much more in-depth than So You Want to Talk About Race and How Not to Get Shot. And I really like the way he formatted it too, in that he talks about his own personal experiences and applies that to larger issues, and then how you as the reader can work to be anti-racist. I really like that format, and it made it really more understandable. Yeah, and I'm still reading that. I think I'm about 54% through on my e-reader. Let's get into fiction. I read Shut Up You're Pretty by Taya Mutonji, and this is a Canadian author. This is her debut novel, and she actually recently won an award for it, which is pretty cool. And it was sold as a series of short stories, but it's not really. It's more just like short stories, but that are all the same story. If that makes sense. It's all featuring the same person. It's just little snapshots from her life. And it's not vignettes because they're like 4 or 5 or more pages long. So I don't know exactly if that's a vignette or not, but I wouldn't consider it a vignette. So yeah, they're little stories from her life growing up, talking a lot about sexuality, and it was interesting because it says it was about unrelenting femininity and feminism, and I thought it was really interesting because in the book that femininity was defined by sexual relations with men, and I was like, I wonder, like, that probably is a commentary on it, but if you're not aware of that, you might not pick up on that. It was very interesting. Look, I quite enjoyed reading it. And then I read Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi, and that is a very interesting story. It totally went in a different direction than what I thought it would. And it's about this young black boy who gets, you know, arrested eventually, like his interactions with the police, and then he gets arrested. And his sister has this kind of weird supernatural powers where she can kind of like enter into people's brains and like see what's going on in them and maybe have a bit of control, and she has like a bit of telekinesis, like she's like a superhero, except she's not like a superhero, like she's not part of a team, she's not going around, you know, doing things, she's kind of living her life with these powers. And when he gets arrested, my total thought was that she's gonna go and like blow up the prison and she's gonna like rescue him, and it was like, was more than that. It wasn't just about that individual story, it was about, you know, there's more to it than just an individual case, which was interesting, because if you look at things like the skin wearing, it was a lot about individual cases, but using those cases as an example of the further issues in them, and we see that. And so you want to talk about race and how to be anti-racist, but what I found Riot Baby did was that it kind of dealt with it as one big issue. Like, it's, you can't just work on it as a case-by-case issue. Something big has to be done, and that was really, really cool. I also read Reproduction by Ian Williams, and holy cow, I am in love. I've already ordered another book by Ian Williams. It's actually on my desk in my room. And I will like read everything this guy has written. So Reproduction is about a young girl comes from a mysterious island, unnamed island, in the Caribbean somewhere, and she comes to Canada, and her mother ends up in the hospital, and there's another woman in the bed beside her, and the son comes in, and he's an older man. They're German Canadian, and she's a Black Canadian immigrant, and things happen and they have a kid, and that's the story. Like, it goes on from there, but there's such experimental writing and such as well, and I adored this book, and it will definitely be on like the top lists, just because of the experimental writing style and the story as well. The story was very compelling and very well told. And then I read Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi, which was very interesting. It's a story about a young girl who has one foot on the other side, and that's how it's described on the back. And I don't want to give spoilers because I think it's very best that you go in and you kind of like take the journey with the main characters. I think that's the best way to explore it, but it is a really, really good book, and I'm trying to come up with ways to describe it without giving spoilers, but I can't. Just trust me that this is a book that you have to read. I'm gonna talk about my 2 DNFs, because I have been doing that in my wrap-ups. Africaville by Jeffrey Colvin. I thought it was mostly done. I only got like a third of the way through before I just got tired of it. I wasn't really connecting with the characters. It felt very strange the way it was being told. Like, one character's death was really drawn out, and another character's death happened in like 2 sentences, and I was just like, you know, like, what's the pacing was all off. I looked on Goodreads and other people were feeling the same way, because I was like, is it like, does this get better or anything? And there was also that disconnect because it takes place in Nova Scotia. So in this place where land was given to Black soldiers, ex-slaves that were fought in the Civil War. Yes, in the Civil War. Sorry, I'm very confused with all the wars in the States. In the Civil War, and because they fought for the British, they were given land in British North America at the time, which was in Nova Scotia, and it was called Africaville. And Jeffrey Colvin is American, and he's trying to write this Canadian experience, and it just, I don't know, came off, and the narrator was giving everyone Caribbean accents, and I was just like, I honestly don't know how people were talking at that time, so maybe they did have Caribbean accents, but I thought it was a very interesting choice, considering that like, they weren't Caribbean, they were, you know, the descendants of ex-slaves in Canada, so wouldn't they have a more Canadian, or if anything like that, Southern American accent? I don't know. And then I DNF'd Antiwoman by Bell Hooks. I was so hyped up for this. I was so excited to read this. And I enjoyed the introduction, but then it got to the first part, and it was kind of like the history of slavery in regards to sexism. But what I felt she was doing was she kept pinning down men and saying, oh, they didn't have it that bad. The woman had it worse. And it was just like, I guess in the 1980s, that was the way to approach feminism. But in like 2020, like 40 years later here, we talk about toxic masculinity and, you know, how we shouldn't really compare how, you know, men don't have it bad at all. You know, women have it worse. Like, yeah, the reason there is sexism is because women are worse off than men in regards to certain things, but we shouldn't have to bring men down. We should have to lift women up, right? That's, I just got really frustrated with that. And I'm still reading. I'm halfway through Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters, which is an amazing fantasy novel. And it's about these people came from this far off land and took over this new land. They colonized it completely. And there's this whole noble system, soldier system type thing set up. And the nobles are dicks. They're just not good people. And the fighters, you know, are training. We're following one of the fighters of the lower caste. And right now he's still in training where I am in the book. But the magic system is amazing. What they do is they draw power from like the demon world, and they can send people to the demon world. They can send like their souls into the demon world so that like the other soldiers can come like kill you because your soul's not in your body, you're not doing anything. And then they can also like enrage people so that they like make them bigger and like stronger and faster and all these things. And they can also like pit their will over yours. And it all comes through this demon world, and I thought it was so cool. Another good thing about this fantasy novel is that the chapters are really short. Well, not the chapters. There's chapters, but then like they're divided into smaller sections. So the sections are really short, and it makes it really like fast to read. I really love short chapters, and you don't find that a lot in fantasy. I find you find like really extremely long chapters. I know in the Malazan series, like chapters can be like 50-60 pages long, and it's, you know, it feels like a slog sometimes if there's not a lot of action happening. But in this one, it's like 4 or 5 pages, and then you get to a new section, and it just feels like it's going so fast. I really enjoy that. So yeah, that's my June wrap up. Let me know what you read in the month of June, and if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are on them, and thank you for watching.